This balancing act became particularly evident in instances where US policy towards Kashmir or other regional issues was perceived to favour one side over the other. Pakistan, in particular, saw the US as an important ally in its long-standing dispute with India, especially in terms of diplomatic leverage. For its part, India viewed the US as an increasingly important partner, but often expressed concerns about the US. This continued military and financial support to Pakistan, especially when that support seemed to enable Pakistan's military presence in Kashmir or its ties to militant groups. Challenges and tensions in the US-Pakistan relationship despite the strategic importance of the US. Pakistan partnership post 9/11, the relationship was marked by periodic crises and challenges. The most significant of these was the issue of Pakistan's alleged support for insurgent groups operating in Afghanistan and the broader region. The US government, particularly under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, expressed frustration with Pakistan's dual role, publicly supporting the war on terror while simultaneously maintaining ties with groups like the Taliban, which undermine the stability of Afghanistan. The situation reached a boiling point in 2011 when US Navy SEAL carried out a covert operation in Abbottabad, Pakistan, to kill Osama bin Laden, who had been living in a compound in the Pakistani city for years. The fact that bin Laden had been hiding in Pakistan without the government's knowledge raised serious questions about Pakistan's commitment to fighting terrorism and its level of cooperation with the US. This event strained relations between the two countries. Although both sides continued to cooperate in counterterrorism efforts, conclusion, the post-9/11 US-Pakistan relationship was fundamentally shaped by the shared goal of combating terrorism and maintaining regional stability. Pakistan became an indispensable ally in the war on terror, providing critical military, logistical and intelligence support to US forces in Afghanistan. However, this partnership was fraught with contradictions, especially as the US faced challenges in reconciling its relationship with Pakistan while also deepening ties with India. The complexities of this relationship have had lasting effects on the broader South Asian geopolitical landscape and continue to influence US policy in the region to this day. As military aid to Pakistan, strategic considerations and geopolitical dynamics, the United States' provision of substantial military aid to Pakistan has been a cornerstone of its foreign policy in South Asia, deeply influencing the dynamics of regional security and US-Pakistan relations. Over the decades, this military assistance has served a range of strategic purposes, from counterterrorism efforts to managing the balance of power in South Asia. While India has grown increasingly important as a defence and trade partner for the US in recent years, Pakistan's strategic geographic position, its role in regional security, and its complex relationship with neighbouring Afghanistan and India ensure its continued importance in US military interests. The genesis of US military aid to Pakistan, the roots of US military aid to Pakistan, can be traced back to the Cold War. During the 1950s, Pakistan was one of the founding members of US-backed defence pacts such as SETA Treaty Organisation and CENTO, Central Treaty Organisation, both of which were designed to contain the spread of communism. In the 1950s and 1960s, Pakistan received military assistance from the US in exchange for its strategic alliance in the region, as the US viewed Pakistan as a bulwark against Soviet influence in South Asia. However, the most significant escalation in military aid came after the 9/11 attacks. With the launch of the US-led war on terror and the subsequent invasion of Afghanistan, Pakistan became an indispensable ally in US counter-terrorism efforts. The US provided substantial military aid to Pakistan to strengthen its counter-terrorism capabilities, including support for Pakistan's army, intelligence agencies, especially the IC, and border security forces. In the years following 9/11, Pakistan received billions of dollars in military assistance, which was intended to help the country combat terrorist networks, secure its borders, and support US operations in Afghanistan. By the early 2000s, the US had provided Pakistan with advanced military equipment, including fighter jets, helicopters, and sophisticated surveillance systems, to bolster its military's counterterrorism capacity. This military aid also helped Pakistan modernize its armed forces and maintain a significant defense capability, which was particularly important given its ongoing rivalry with India and the volatile situation in Afghanistan. Strategic considerations in the US-Pakistan military alliance. The US's provision of military aid to Pakistan has been driven by several key strategic considerations. One of the primary reasons the US has continued its military assistance to Pakistan is the country's critical geographic position. Pakistan shares borders with Afghanistan, China, and India, and its location places it at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. This makes Pakistan an essential player in maintaining regional stability and containing the spread of extremism. The US needs Pakistan's cooperation to maintain its military presence in Afghanistan and secure vital supply routes. Pakistan's control over the Khyber Pass and other strategic routes that lead into Afghanistan has made it an indispensable partner in US military logistics. These routes have been vital for transporting supplies and personnel to US forces operating in Afghanistan, and Pakistan's cooperation has been crucial in ensuring the flow of military resources. Additionally, Pakistan's proximity to the Middle East, particularly Iran and the Arabian Sea, adds another layer of significance to its role in US military interests. The US has a long-standing interest in maintaining stability in the Persian Gulf, and Pakistan's role in providing access to the Arabian Sea and its proximity to the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil shipments, makes it a strategically important ally. The role of US military aid in counterterrorism. Since 9/11, the US military aid to Pakistan has been largely directed toward enhancing the country's ability to combat terrorism and insurgency. Pakistan's military operations in the tribal areas and along its western border with Afghanistan have been pivotal in disrupting al-Qaeda and Taliban networks operating in the region. US aid has helped equip Pakistani forces with the necessary tools to fight these groups, including intelligence sharing, training, and advanced technology such as drones and surveillance equipment. Pakistan's intelligence agency, the IC, has also played a significant role in facilitating the capture and elimination of key al-Qaeda figures, including the infamous operation to kill Osama bin Laden in 2011, which occurred in Abbottabad, Pakistan. While Pakistan's cooperation in these efforts has been crucial to US goals, the partnership has been contentious, with the US sometimes accusing Pakistan of harboring elements within its security apparatus that are sympathetic to or actively supporting insurgent groups, particularly those targeting US forces in Afghanistan. Despite these tensions, US military aid has remained an essential component of the partnership. The US has continued to provide financial support to help Pakistan strengthen its counterterrorism capabilities, though this aid has been periodically cut or suspended due to concerns over Pakistan's handling of certain militant groups and its alleged duplicity in the war on terror. The growing US-India partnership, a delicate balance in recent years. The US has increasingly turned to India as a key partner in South Asia, especially in the context of its pivot to Asia strategy. As India's economic and military power has grown, the US has sought to deepen its defense and trade ties with New Delhi. The growing US-India relationship is rooted in shared interests, including a commitment to counterbalance China's rising influence in the region and to promote a rules-based international order. India has emerged as a strategic partner in the Indian Ocean region, and the US has been keen to provide India with advanced military technology, joint defense exercises, and stronger diplomatic support. The US has also supported India in its efforts to modernize its military and strengthen its defense capabilities, recognizing India's importance as a stabilizing force in the region. However, despite the growing US-India partnership, Pakistan's strategic position continues to ensure that it remains within US military interests. The US has consistently emphasized the importance of maintaining stable relations with both India and Pakistan, understanding that tensions between the two nuclear-armed neighbors could have far-reaching consequences for regional and global security. The US also remains concerned about the stability of Afghanistan and the threat of extremist groups, which makes Pakistan's cooperation in counterterrorism efforts indispensable. Pakistan's continued strategic relevance. Pakistan's strategic importance remains central to US interests in South Asia. While the US has forged a closer partnership with India, particularly in defense and trade, Pakistan's position as a nuclear-armed country with significant military capabilities, a pivotal role in Afghanistan, and a close relationship with China makes it impossible for the US to entirely sideline the country. The US continues to rely on Pakistan for stability in Afghanistan, cooperation on counterterrorism efforts, and military access to Central Asia and the Middle East. Furthermore, Pakistan's military presence along its border with India and its defense capability act as a critical counterbalance to India's growing military power. The US is also concerned with Pakistan's ties to China, particularly the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) project, which adds another layer of strategic complexity to the region. Conclusion. While the growing India defense and trade partnership is a notable shift in South Asian geopolitics, Pakistan's strategic position ensures that it remains a key player in US military interests. The substantial military aid that the US has provided to Pakistan over the years has been driven by a range of strategic considerations, including counterterrorism efforts, regional stability, and the geopolitical balance of power in South Asia. Despite the tensions that have arisen between the two countries over the years, Pakistan's importance in US foreign policy remains undiminished, reflecting the complex and multifaceted nature of the US-Pakistan relationship. America's diplomatic engagement with India and Pakistan, balancing interests and navigating nuances. The United States' diplomatic engagement with India and Pakistan has always been a delicate balancing act, shaped by a multitude of strategic, economic and security interests. While both nations are significant in their own right, the US has faced the challenge of maintaining cordial relationships with both, despite their historical rivalry. The diplomatic nuances of America's relationships with these two nuclear-armed neighbors have led to complex and, at times, conflicting dynamics, creating perceptions of favoritism towards Pakistan, particularly in periods of heightened tensions between India and Pakistan. The historical context. US relations with India and Pakistan. The US has had a complicated history with both India and Pakistan, shaped by the broader geopolitical context of the Cold War, the War on Terror, and changing regional dynamics in South Asia. During the Cold War, the US aligned more closely with Pakistan as part of its broader strategy to contain Soviet influence in the region. Pakistan's participation in defense pacts such as SATO and CENTO placed it squarely in the US camp, while India, following its policy of non-alignment, leaned toward the Soviet Union. This geopolitical divide influenced American policy in the region for decades. However, the post-Cold War era, particularly after the 9/11 attacks, ushered in a new chapter in US diplomacy towards South Asia. The US re-engaged with both nations, but for different reasons. India as a growing economic power in counterbalance to China, and Pakistan as a critical ally in the war on terror. The nuances of managing these two relationships have often led to US diplomats being accused of favoring one over the other, depending on the circumstances. The post-9/11 shift, US alignment with Pakistan in the immediate aftermath of the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks. The US sought to dismantle the global terrorist network of al-Qaeda and its allies. Pakistan became an indispensable partner in this endeavor, given its strategic location bordering Afghanistan, where al-Qaeda and the Taliban were operating. US diplomacy pivoted to aligning closely with Pakistan, despite Pakistan's historical support for the Taliban during the 1990s. The US provided Pakistan with substantial military aid and economic assistance, expecting the country to support US operations in Afghanistan act against terrorist groups operating on its soil and help stabilize the region. This partnership led to a deepening of ties between the US and Pakistan, which was seen as a pragmatic decision for the US. In the short term, even though the US was often concerned with Pakistan's support for certain insurgent groups and its nuclear weapons program. In this period, US support for Pakistan was sometimes perceived as a form of favoritism by India, especially when Pakistan was accused of harboring militants who targeted Indian territory, particularly in Kashmir. The US found itself in a position where it had to balance its counterterrorism objectives with the need to maintain a relationship with India, which was concerned about Pakistan's military policies and its backing of insurgents in the region. Growing US-India ties, strategic shifts in the 21st century, while the US was deepening its ties with Pakistan in the context of the war on terror. Its relationship with India was also evolving. In the early 21st century, India's economic growth, democratic credentials, and rising strategic importance, especially in countering China, began to attract US attention. The growing partnership between the US and India was formalized through trade agreements, defense cooperation, and shared strategic interest in the Indo-Pacific region. In 2008, following the Mumbai attacks carried out by Pakistan-based militants, the US started to adjust its diplomatic approach. While it continued to engage with Pakistan, the US increasingly turned to India as an important regional partner, especially in defense and trade. The US India civilian nuclear deal in 2005 was a landmark moment, signaling the strengthening of ties and the US's recognition of India as a global player. Despite this, the US faced the challenge of not alienating Pakistan, whose cooperation in the war on terror remained critical. The US also wanted to avoid exacerbating tensions between India and Pakistan, both of which were nuclear-armed states, has walked a fine line between fostering closer ties with India while simultaneously addressing Pakistan's concerns. This balancing act remains a central challenge in US foreign policy, with implications for stability in South Asia, the US's broader strategic interests, and the evolving global geopolitical order. Kashmir, human rights, and US policy. Balancing perspectives and strategic interests, the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan has been one of the most enduring and contentious geopolitical issues in South Asia. Over the decades, the region has witnessed multiple wars, ongoing border skirmishes and widespread violence, all underpinned by deeply entrenched national identities and competing territorial claims. Against this backdrop, the United States has been consistently involved in diplomatic efforts to address tensions between India and Pakistan, often finding itself caught between the two. One of the most contentious aspects of US policy has been its response to the Kashmir issue and accusations of human rights violations, which has led some to question why America sometimes seems to favor Pakistan's narrative over India's stance on the region. Kashmir. A brief historical overview. Kashmir's status has been disputed since India's partition in 1947. Following partition, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, which had a Muslim majority population but a Hindu ruler, became a flashpoint. India and Pakistan fought their first war over Kashmir in 1947-48, with the region being divided along the line of control, low C, with India controlling about 2/3 and Pakistan controlling the remaining third. Since then, both nations have claimed Kashmir in its entirety, and the issue has led to 3 wars, numerous skirmishes, and decades of unresolved political and territorial disputes. India regards Kashmir as an integral part of its territory, especially after it acceded to India in 1947, following a request by the Maharaja of Kashmir for assistance against Pakistani tribal incursions. Pakistan, on the other hand, claims Kashmir based on its own interpretation of the partition's legacy, arguing that the Muslim-majority region should have been part of Pakistan. The human rights situation in Kashmir, particularly in Indian-ministered Kashmir, has been a focal point of global concern. The region has been under an Indian military presence for decades, with frequent reports of human rights abuses, including arbitrary detentions, use of excessive force, enforced disappearances, and restrictions on freedom of movement. International human rights organizations, as well as Pakistani officials, have consistently raised concerns about the treatment of Kashmiri civilians under Indian rule. The US stance on Kashmir, a delicate balance. The US has historically maintained a nuanced and often cautious approach to the Kashmir issue. On one hand, it has emphasized the importance of bilateral dialogue between India and Pakistan to resolve their differences peacefully. The US has also acknowledged India's sovereignty over Kashmir, consistent with its long-standing diplomatic support for India's territorial integrity. On the other hand, the US has expressed concern over human rights violations in Kashmir, particularly in the wake of violent crackdowns and restrictions on local populations. For years, US officials, particularly under the Obama administration, repeatedly called for both sides to address the Kashmir issue through dialogue, often urging Pakistan to curb cross-border militancy, while urging India to exercise restraint in dealing with protesters and militants. While the US generally refrains from taking a hard position on the territorial dispute itself, its emphasis on human rights in Kashmir has sometimes been more aligned with Pakistan's narrative, especially regarding abuses committed by Indian security forces. This inclination to highlight human rights violations in Kashmir has led some to argue that the US is more sympathetic to Pakistan's concerns over India's actions in the region. Pakistan has long argued that India is engaging in state-sponsored violence against Kashmiris, framing the issue as a fight for self-determination against Indian repression. For Pakistan, the Kashmir issue is not just a territorial dispute, but also a matter of justice and human rights. Over the years, it has used these arguments in its diplomatic outreach, presenting India's actions in Kashmir as evidence of a pattern of abuse that warrants international intervention. India's criticism of US response to Kashmir. From India's perspective, however, US responses to the Kashmir issue, particularly those related to human rights violations, often seem to overlook the complexities of the conflict. India argues that Kashmir is an integral part of its territory and that the security measures implemented in the region are necessary to combat terrorism and maintain law and order. India has also stressed that many of the human rights violations reported in Kashmir are the result of militant violence, particularly from separatist groups and Pakistan-based terrorists, which complicates the situation. India has expressed frustration with the US for what it perceives as an undue emphasis on human rights in Kashmir, sometimes at the expense of recognizing the broader security context in which these events occur. For India, the US positioning on Kashmir must take into account the strategic threat posed by Pakistan's support for insurgent groups operating in Indian-administered Kashmir, as well as the potential destabilizing impact of third-party interference in a region that India views as an internal matter. When US officials criticize human rights abuses in Kashmir, India sees it as foreign meddling in its internal affairs, particularly when such criticisms come from Pakistan, whom India accuses of using the Kashmir issue to deflect international attention from its own human rights record in areas like Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan. India also takes issue with US calls for greater autonomy for Kashmir, viewing such demands as potentially legitimizing Pakistan's position and undermining India's sovereignty. US-China tensions, Pakistan, and the evolving geopolitical landscape in South Asia. The intensifying tensions between the United States and China have become a defining feature of global geopolitics in recent years, impacting alliances, strategic partnerships, and regional dynamics across the world. As the US seeks to counter China's growing influence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and South Asia, its relationship with Pakistan has become increasingly complicated. Pakistan's growing alignment with China, particularly through its participation in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, and other strategic agreements, has created a diplomatic balancing act for the US. This evolving relationship with China directly influences US-Pakistan ties, which in turn has consequences for the US's relationship with India, a critical partner in the Indo-Pacific region. China's growing influence in South Asia, China's rise as a global superpower, has been accompanied by its expanded influence in South Asia, where it has increasingly built strategic partnerships, particularly with Pakistan. China's investment in infrastructure projects, economic development, and military ties with Pakistan has significantly altered the geopolitical landscape of the region. At the heart of this relationship is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, a multi-billion-dollar initiative aimed at connecting China's Xinjiang province to the Arabian Sea through a network of roads, railways, and pipelines passing through Pakistan. CPEC is expected to boost Pakistan's economy, create jobs, and improve infrastructure, while offering China direct access to key global shipping routes. In addition to economic cooperation, China and Pakistan have also deepened their military ties. China has become one of Pakistan's key arms suppliers, providing advanced technology and weaponry, including fighter jets, naval vessels, and missile defense systems. Pakistan's reliance on China for military hardware and strategic support has grown, especially as the US has occasionally reduced its military assistance or imposed conditions on aid due to concerns over Pakistan's handling of militant groups. The US has long viewed China's growing footprint in South Asia with apprehension, as it sees China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and military expansion as attempts to increase its influence and counterbalance American power. Pakistan's alignment with China in this context has complicated the US's diplomatic stance in the region, particularly as it seeks to counter China's regional ambitions. Pakistan is a strategic counterbalance to China. Despite Pakistan's deepening ties with China, the US has maintained a strategic partnership with Pakistan, often using the country as a counterbalance to China's growing regional influence. While the US has increasingly turned to India as a central partner in its Indo-Pacific strategy, Pakistan's proximity to China and its role in China's broader regional strategy have made it an important player in US calculations. The US needs Pakistan's cooperation on issues like counterterrorism, regional stability, and the containment of China's influence in South Asia. One of the most notable ways the US has sought to counterbalance China in the region is by strengthening its relationship with India, a key strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific. The US and India share many common interests, including security concerns regarding China, the promotion of a rules-based international order, and the need to maintain a stable and secure Indian Ocean region. The growing US-India defense partnership, through joint military exercises, arms sales, and intelligence sharing, is an example of the US actively trying to counter China's influence in the region by aligning with India. However, the US cannot entirely ignore Pakistan, as it remains a significant player in the region, especially in the context of Afghanistan and its strategic location at the crossroads of Central Asia and the Middle East. US policymakers have often found themselves walking a fine line, balancing their relationship with India while trying to maintain Pakistan's cooperation in counterterrorism and regional security efforts. The US dilemma, supporting Pakistan while managing India as the US seeks to counter China, its relationship with Pakistan has become increasingly complex. While the US has historically supported Pakistan as an important partner in South Asia, particularly in counterterrorism efforts, its growing reliance on China for economic and military support poses challenges for the US. In this context, the US must walk a delicate diplomatic tightrope, as any overt support for Pakistan risks alienating India, a critical partner in the Indo-Pacific and a counterbalance to China's growing regional influence. At the same time, the US has attempted to use its relationship with Pakistan to strategically counter China's increasing footprint. Pakistan's participation in CPC, its growing military ties with China, and its alignment with Beijing in international forums are all seen as part of a broader Chinese strategy to challenge American influence in the region. However, the US has tried to mitigate the impact of this growing partnership by engaging with Pakistan on shared interests, particularly in Afghanistan, where Pakistan plays a critical role in the peace process. The US has also sought to limit Pakistan's growing dependence on China by encouraging greater economic diversification, including investment from Western countries and regional powers. While the US recognizes that Pakistan's alliance with China is driven by economic necessity, it has also encouraged Pakistan to maintain strong diplomatic ties with the US and other Western nations to avoid becoming overly reliant on Beijing. India's response to US-Pakistan-China dynamics. India, as a growing global power and a key partner for the US in the Indo-Pacific, has closely monitored the evolving relationship between the US and Pakistan, particularly as it relates to China. India views Pakistan's deepening military and economic ties with China with significant concern, seeing it as a direct threat to its own security and regional influence. The US support for Pakistan, even as Pakistan's relationship with China grows, has raised questions in New Delhi about the US strategic priorities in the region. For India, the US policy of balancing its relationships with both India and Pakistan creates an underlying tension. India has been vocal in expressing its frustration over what it perceives as US indifference to Pakistan's support for terrorist groups operating in Indian-administered Kashmir, as well as Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. India has urged the US to take a firmer stance against Pakistan and to avoid strengthening its ties with a country that it sees as a destabilizing force in South Asia. Despite these concerns, India has recognized the importance of US support in countering China. The US-India defense relationship, particularly in the context of China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific, has become a cornerstone of India's foreign policy. India's participation in forums like the Quad, comprising the US, Japan, Australia and India, is an example of how India and the US are working together to counter China's maritime ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region. The US strategy. Managing competition and cooperation, the US faces a challenging geopolitical landscape in South Asia, where it must balance its strategic priorities, including countering China's influence, managing its relationships with India and Pakistan, and ensuring regional stability. Pakistan's increasing alignment with China complicates US efforts as it seeks to use its partnership with Pakistan to counterbalance China's regional dominance without alienating India. The US is likely to continue supporting Pakistan in some capacity, especially in counterterrorism efforts and regional security. At the same time, the US will also strengthen its partnership with India, focusing on defense, trade, and countering China's rise. The ongoing US-China competition will undoubtedly shape the future of US-Pakistan relations, with Pakistan's role in China's Belt and Road Initiative and its strategic partnership with China playing a key role in this dynamic. Ultimately, the US will need to carefully manage its relationships with both India and Pakistan, ensuring that its policy in South Asia supports its broader geopolitical goals without undermining its partnerships in the region. This complex balancing act will continue to influence the trajectory of US foreign policy in South Asia and its approach to the China challenge in the coming years.